Music fans around the world are remembering record producer George Martin, who died last night at age 90. He signed the Beatles after others rejected them, and he was behind 30 of the band's #1 singles. He earned 6 Grammys, a knighthood, and a spot in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Martin still holds the Billboard record, producing 23 #1 pop singles.
Paul McCartney wrote this morning, "I'm so sad to hear the news of the passing of dear George Martin. He guided the career of the Beatles with such skill and good humor. If anyone earned the title of the fifth Beatle, it was George." With us now, Joe Levy, contributing editor for Rolling Stone magazine. Welcome.
Good to be here.
So help us understand what it was, other than signing them, that George Martin brought to the Beatles.
Well, he brought so much. That's the amazing thing. Here's a guy who, at the height of swinging 60s, was still dressed in a tie and a white shirt like a banker. He was old enough to be their dad, but he had an avant-garde side to him. He loved the idea of audio exploration. And those signature sounds of the Beatles, the double-tracking vocals, he invented that for them. The backwards taped on some of their psychedelic masterpieces. That's because he loved that sound. He thought it was funny. He brought it to them. They became obsessed with it. So he wasn't just a guy who turned on the microphones. He had the idea that you could do more in the recording studio than just make the music a photograph. He said, I wanted to make it a painting.
He molded the music.
He did indeed.
So, Joe, if all those companies rejected the Beatles, what is it that he saw? How did they come together?
Well, that's a good question, and there's some dispute about this. You know, did they get signed because they were great songwriters? Did they get signed because they were great musicians? He didn't hear it at first either. He heard the demo tapes, didn't love them. He heard them in the room when it went down for tea. And then when they got to start playing their own songs, he recognized something, and he wasn't sure what it was. He later said, I was used to groups that had one guy standing in the front and a backing group. Here were 2 guys standing in the front. They did everything. He wasn't quite sure what he was hearing, but he was hearing something.
I love that he was a pilot in World War II. He was an oboist. He was a self-taught pianist. And then when he first...
That's him playing piano on In My Life, by the way.
Yes, and when he first heard the Beatles play the song Please Please Me, he told them he thought it was sort of morose and said, pick up the tempo, add a little something, and it became their first #1 hit. So he was a producer. He was not a businessman. He actually knew the craft of music.
He was a producer at a time that this role was being invented. Yeah. He was inventing what to do in the recording studio, and he was helping the Beatles see that you could do anything with your music. Yesterday, one of the most recorded songs in the world, he's the one who said, maybe we should put strings. Oh, we're a rock group. We don't do that. We don't do strings. And he brings Paul McCartney around to his house, plays the string arrangement on the piano. Presto.
I say that because I think in many ways, too, he was like a teacher. He helped them. He helped them become their best selves.
I think that's absolutely right. He was a teacher and an explorer. Most teachers teach what they already know, but they had a sense of shared discovery. They were finding it together. At Sgt. Pepper's, they're inventing the way that music still sounds, the way records are still made today. And they're just creating it at the moment. Penny Lane, an amazing story. They record 2 versions, and John says, I don't know which one we like. Put them together. You'll figure it out. They're at different speeds. They're at different pitches, different tempos. He manipulates the tape to create the sound that no one had ever heard before.
Did he have influence on their life after they split up?
It's an interesting question. As Paul has said, as we just heard, they looked to him as a father figure. He continued to produce records with Paul. So I think in the sense that he was their rock, yes. They argued about credit that each of them deserved sometimes afterwards, but they never argued about what he had given them. They always showed him respect. They always showed him consideration. They always acknowledged what he had done with them, for them.
I like how you said he looked like a banker, but he had a wicked sense of humor, and you said so did the Beatles.
That's right. You know, they bonded because he was part of a comedy revolution. He recorded Peter Sellers. He recorded these guys who were turning England on fire with their surrealist sense of humor. And there's a famous story that when the Beatles first get to the studio for their first Abbey Road session, he sets up the microphones and he says, is there anything about the setup you don't like? And George looks at him and says, well, I don't like your tie for a start. And right then they must have recognized something in each other. Yeah. They must have recognized the way that their minds worked and really bonded over this.
Joe Levy, great to have you here.